And he became a rebel. The only way he really could fit into that school was to become a stoner, and that's what he became that fall.
I met Kurt in 10th grade when I was probably 15 years old, and I'd flunked history the year before, and they said, if you don't want to retake 9th grade history, there's one option. You can take 12th grade business law. And I said, fine, I'll take 12th grade business law. And I went into the classroom, and as usual, I made my way to the very back row, to the very back corner, so no one was behind me or anything. And I looked over, and there was this other kid that I recognized, little blonde guy, sitting next to me. And I could tell he wasn't in the 12th grade. And he had Motorhead written on his peachy with all the other bands of the day, Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and such. And I said, hey, you like Motorhead? And he opened his peachy, and he had all these cutout pictures of different bands, guitar players. He had a picture of Lemmy Kilminster from Motorhead flipping off a Ronald McDonald statue. And I said, hey, that's awesome. And from then on, we were just we hung out quite a bit. We had lots of fun together. We drank constantly. He drank. He didn't have a stomach problem then. So,
I saw him as bipolar. I mean, you know, he could be
down.
Creative and happy, and we were putting together a great party plan, and then other times we'd have a great party plan, but he wants nothing to do with it just for the sake of having nothing to do with it. So
he didn't like to socialize, and that's where we, like, him and Dale Krover both dropped out of school at the end of 10th grade, and I stayed in just for social reasons.
Yeah, me too.
And we'd all go to the parties, the local parties, and he didn't want to have anything to do with the rest of the rednecks around this town. And we were all like, well, there's rednecks, what the hell, you know? That's all there is.
He became a dropout, and he dropped out of school. In fact, one of the more remarkable stories I discovered in doing my book was that he then went to a school that was an alternative school set up for dropouts, and then he dropped out of the dropout school.
He was going to pretend he was mentally retarded so he could get a free high school diploma and go to the retarded class.
Yeah, I remember.
And he was sure that that would be an easy way to get through high school and not have to do anything but grunt and moan. Yeah. It never came to fruition.
Yeah.
In April 1984, Kurt's relationship with his parents suffered another breakdown. After a colossal fight at their home in Aberdeen, Wendy told Kurt to leave the house. At just 17 years of age, Kurt became homeless, a period made famous by the Nirvana record Something in the Way.
At that point, he became sort of a kid adrift. He spent a lot of time homeless. That's the era where he talked about living under a bridge, which in my research probably was mythical. He did live a number of places in Aberdeen other than his mother's house, but under that bridge was not something that he ever, you know, spent many nights under there. If he did, it was one or two, not the months that he seemed to indicate in telling his own personal history.
He never lived under a bridge. It wasn't the 60s. There's a bridge, the bridge going out to like Lance's house, out to Bear Gulch. Right. He used to like smoke pot under there, and if he was staying out too late, he would have to wait until his stepdad left his mom's house before he could go in. So he'd wait under there, but he never lived under a bridge. That was total fiction, total bullshit.
Right.
He was too savvy. He lived, the worst place he ever lived, I think, was the back seat of Greg Hokinson's mom's Volvo. But other than that, he was a savvy homeless person. He would go wait in the waiting rooms of the hospital right. because there was free coffee and a color TV. You could act like you were waiting for a dying relative.
His family were around. They were never not part of his life, but he would go weeks without seeing them. His father tells stories of at one point, you know, getting a phone call from his mother saying, I haven't seen Kurt for a couple of weeks. And his dad tells a pretty compelling story of driving around the streets of Aberdeen looking for his son, then finally finding him and taking him home for a few days. And then Kurt would be back off on his own. So there were, it wasn't exactly as if his family abandoned him. In some ways, it was more Kurt rejected every aspect of his family and he rejected them. They say, all of them, that they made attempts to keep him within the nucleus of the family. But at the same time, I also understand that it was hard to be around him. He was, at that point, very down on everything. He was very cynical, and he was abusing drugs. Basically anything he could find he would put into his body, and that included alcohol, it included LSD, it included methamphetamine. Kurt later claimed he took heroin during that period. My research for my book, I couldn't find a person that knew of any heroin coming through Aberdeen, but it is possible he took narcotic prescription drugs that maybe he'd ripped off from somebody's house, and he claimed that that was heroin, but I don't think he was using injection drugs at that point. But he was not living a healthy lifestyle. He was putting anything in his system. He was trying to blot out and not be present. And that kind of became his life.
We were really heavy drinkers and heavy substance abusers at really young ages, and Kurt was too.
And vandalizers.
Kurt liked to do, he would huff isobutane out of the bottom of Ed's shaving gel, and he'd get these horrible head rushes and almost twitch on the ground, but he kept doing it. He made this big apparatus to huff isobutane out of the bottom of Ed's shaving grid gel, and he declared himself addicted to Ed's shaving gel at one point.
After months of being shunted around between family members, Kurt was finally offered a room in the family home of his close friend Jesse Reed. A deeply religious family, Jesse's father Dave felt that the Reeds could help Kurt to rebuild his life.
Jesse Reed's dad was a Vietnam vet, okay, and they went to our church when I was young, the Reeds did, and they lived out in the country, and
Kurt lived there, and Kurt hated everybody there but Jesse.
Right.
I think at one time, Jesse's dad forced Kurt to go to a Christian church, and Kurt really resented that and hated him for it.
Right.
And Jesse's dad used to be in a 60s Beach Boys clone band called the Beachcombers that still plays like the casino circuit around here.
I think it was almost like a Christian camp out at their house where they were locked in.
But I remember that
he was a brutal.
Jesse's dad had his only single he'd ever put out on vinyl, and there was one more left, and Kurt smashed it in rage one night, and said that Jesse was crying and all scared that his dad was going to find out that Kurt smashed his only 7-inch from his high school days.
Yeah, see, when you've got him with his leg all screwed up from Vietnam, it was almost like it was a weird environment. It was all about memories in the past and
his dad sold those big giant satellite dishes back in the 80s when there was no channel lock. So you could go to Jesse's house and watch like Russian TV and Chinese TV and things like that, and porno like 24 hours a day.
By June 1985, Kurt was on the move again. He and Jesse moved into their first home, an apartment in Aberdeen that was to become known as the infamous Pink Apartment.
The Pink Apartment.
Well, it was just a large building. It didn't have a name, and there was a redneck guy that lived across the way. He would bitch at us for sitting in this empty apartment with absolutely no furniture and drinking and being loud all night.
Just a tape deck listening to the Bad Brains or part-time Christians over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And a lot of our friends that were, regular townies didn't like the fact that we hung around with Cobain. They thought he was crazy. And they'd say, geez, why do you... I was starting to develop an ear for punk rock at the time, just from having it repeatedly drilled into my head. A lot of people didn't like him because he'd gone punk.
Well, that apartment, it was empty. And we wrote, remember the lyrics? My apartment is real bare.
A tape player and a chair. That was from Spam.
Refrigerators, dry and fucked. Can of processed meat product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We made a sing-along tape one night, remember?
Yeah, we were real drunk, and we wrote a lot of lyrics, and we beat on pots and pans. He did have pots and pans, but he didn't have any furniture. And,
the kitchen table came with it.
Oh, yeah.
And him and Jesse just slept in sleeping bags. We were trying to act like we had this little subculture punk scene in Aberdeen, but it wasn't really very much of... You couldn't really call it a scene.